Mountains of Blame, Climate and Culpability in the Philippine Uplands, authors William Smith and K. Shivaramakrishnan. Ethnographic Context and Environmental Dilemma. The Palawan people of the Philippine uplands practice Sweden farming, a method closely tied to their cultural identity and ecological practices. Smith notes that Sweden farming links local indigenous cosmology with broader social economic issues, revealing how traditional practices are increasingly challenged by modern pressures. The environmental dilemma includes the impacts of climate change, particularly highlighted by the severe effects of the 1997-98 El Niño event, which caused drought, crop failures, and resource scarcity. Cultural ecology. For the Palawan people, Sweden farming is an agricultural technique that embodies their cultural identity and ecological understanding. The practice of clearing and cultivating land is linked to their spiritual beliefs, emphasizing their relationship with nature. The Palawan people's subsistence practices are intertwined with their cosmology. They believe moral transgressions, like incest, can directly affect environmental conditions. The Palawan community understanding of climate change is deeply rooted in their cultural beliefs. They believe environmental changes are consequences of social morality. As most Palawans attribute the unique extremity of the 1997-98 drought to incestuous behavior or other kinds of linear moral decline rather than cyclical weather patterns, the widespread perception of declining moral restraint within the community means that many indigenous people understand El Niño conditions to occur at increasing intervals.
Cultural materialism. The Palawan's traditional Swidden farming is linked to their ecological knowledge and resource management. Their farming practices reflect a deep understanding of their environment and allow them to adapt to climatic changes in their environment. Government restrictions imposed on traditional practices demonstrate how political and economic structures can disrupt indigenous livelihoods. We see this disruption lead to a shift in agricultural practices from Swidden farming to more commercial farming. This affects the Palawan people's cultural identity and environmental stewardship. The Palawan people's cosmology connects their social behaviors, like incest, to environmental health. They believe that moral transgressions can lead to adverse weather conditions and that their cultural beliefs are informed by material realities and their ecological conditions. Political ecology. Modern governmental restrictions on traditional agricultural practices have forced Palawan to adapt to commercial farming. This can lead to cultural dilution and an increased vulnerability to climate-related challenges, such as the severe impacts of El Niño. The Palawan people rely on traditional knowledge passed down through generations and rely on knowledge from Penglima, who are over their hamlets. Traditionally, indigenous families initially secured subsistence from upland Swidden plots. With pressure from the Palawan Tropical Forestry Protection Program, PTFPP, pressure exerted by forestry projects over time has also influenced the decision to move away from or de-emphasize Swidden agriculture. This has caused a shift in food production, leading to more shortages during droughts and inclement weather conditions. Political ecology helps build a better understanding of how Palawan and Filipino people interact with one another. For instance, when the government restricts punishments for incest, many of the Palawan people believe that is the cause of bad weather. This shows the perceived relationship between climate change and poor social behavior. Spiritual ecology. The Palawan people believe climate change happens because the issues within their community cause irregular and extreme climatic conditions. Ritual testing of forested areas is therefore considered essential before clearing, as larger trees could be inhabited by Lengam or Takgiba, people of the forest. Determining the presence of these forest people is a varied practice, but at its most elementary level, it involves a conversation with spirits inhabiting trees within a potential clearing. This may require walking through the site and talking to any spirits present. As is stated often in the ethnography, the Palawan people believe incest leads to a change in the weather patterns and is part of their cosmology. Therefore, many Palawan people believe favorable environmental conditions must be continually maintained by ensuring good relations with a range of spiritual beings, deities, and ancestors through reciprocal and highly moralized exchanges. They view incest to be a significant social transgression that upsets the relationship between humans and spirits, and it can lead to environmental extremes. If the incestuous crime is not resolved, then negative climatic conditions will happen to the entire region instead of punishing the offenders.
Ethnoecology. The Palawan people hold a very deep belief that their cultural practices are intricately linked with the environment. They view their rituals and societal norms as crucial in maintaining climate balance. Unfortunately, despite their sustainable methods, the Palawan have been unfairly accused of deforestation and environmental damage. This accusation has since led the state to criminalization of their traditional practices, which has further marginalized the community. A fascinating perspective within the Palawan community is that their belief that negative climate change stems directly from social immorality. Discussions in 2011 and 2012, for example, suggested that these issues, such as incest, were seen as contributing to adverse weather conditions. The Palawan believed that improper performance of rituals or abandonment of agricultural traditions could result in droughts or poor harvests for that season. Regrettably, government policies have pressured the Palawan to abandon their traditional methods in favor of more modern and supposedly sustainable livelihoods. These changes have backfired, increasing the community's vulnerability to climate change. A prime example of this would be their traditional Swidden agriculture, which is a sustainable practice of rotating the fields to allow more natural forest regeneration. Its criminalization has forced the Palawan into less sustainable farming methods. As a result of this, they often face hunger because of climate-induced crop failures, which they interpret as punishment for straying them away from traditional ecological practices. The impact of these government policies extends beyond just agriculture. The book we're discussing today highlights how such policies have led to land dispossession and increased food insecurity for the Palawan. This exacerbates their sense of guilt and responsibility for the environmental challenges they face, which just creates a cycle of blame and distress.
Proposed solutions. There are no easy solutions and often only partial shifts in this discussion. The primary problem is the constant intrusion of the government on indigenous practices and livelihoods, with a growing number of Palawan people seeking life away from traditions.
So, what can actually be done? A promising solution is to leverage indigenous knowledge in the fight against climate change. Indigenous communities, like the Palawan, have long been recognized as stewards of the land, who possess invaluable insights into sustainable practices. The United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change has increasingly acknowledged both indigenous environmental expertise and the vulnerabilities that these communities face. Intensive lobbying by indigenous groups and international NGOs, particularly the one leading up to the 2015 UNFCCC 21st Conference of Parties, highlighted the essential role of indigenous knowledge in combating climate change. This advocacy resulted in the inclusion of indigenous knowledge in the Paris Agreement, which was a giant signal towards a shift in valuing traditional ecological knowledge. By integrating more indigenous practices into broader climate strategies, we can create more sustainable and effective solutions that not only result but also empower the Palawan people. This approach not only honors their cultural heritage but also enhances their resilience against environmental changes.
As we have seen in examples in other countries, like the integration of indigenous practices in Australia, this solution has merit and could be beneficial. This would take a large campaign to educate both the Palawan and Filipino people about the importance and value of Swidden agriculture and land management. However, as stated in the ethnography, it may be less likely to succeed because many of the Palawan people believe so strongly in the community morality being the cause of climate change rather than environmental factors.